The town of Black Hollow was known for its coal mines, but not much else. Miners worked long hours, digging deep into the earth for pay that barely kept their families fed. The work was grueling and dangerous, and the deeper they went, the darker and colder it became. Eli Carter was one of the best miners in Black Hollow. His experience and unshakable resolve earned him respect, though people whispered that he had a streak of bad luck. 3 of his partners had disappeared over the years, each vanishing without a trace in the deepest shafts. Eli never spoke of it, but the silence in his eyes told stories no one dared to ask about. One morning, the foreman announced that they'd be reopening an old sealed-off tunnel in the deepest part of the mine. The rumor was that it had been abandoned decades ago after a collapse claimed several lives. But with coal running low, the company decided to take the risk again. Eli was assigned to lead the team. As they descended into the earth, the air grew thick and stale, heavy with a silence that seemed to swallow every sound. The old tunnel was tight and twisted, its walls marked with strange claw-like gouges that none of the miners could explain. "Looks like something's been digging here," muttered Tom, one of Eli's crew. "Don't start with that nonsense," Eli snapped, though his voice was tight. "Rocks shift, they leave marks. Keep working." Hours passed as they cleared debris and set up supports. But as they dug deeper, an unsettling feeling grew among the team. The temperature dropped sharply, and the air carried a faint metallic scent that made their skin crawl. Then they found it, a cavern. It wasn't on any map, and it shouldn't have been there. Inside, the walls shimmered with a strange, wet blackness that seemed to absorb their lantern light. At the center of the cavern was a deep pit, its edges lined with jagged rocks that looked like teeth. "What the hell is this?" Tom whispered, his voice echoing faintly. Eli didn't answer. He was staring into the pit, where something moved. Something alive. A low guttural sound rose from the depths, a noise that made their bones vibrate. Suddenly, one of the miners screamed as a shadowy tendril shot out of the pit, wrapping around his ankle and dragging him toward the edge. "Help me!" he shrieked, clawing at the ground. Eli lunged forward, grabbing the man's arm, but the force was too strong. The miner was yanked into the pit, his screams fading into the darkness. "Back to the lift, now!" Eli shouted. The remaining miners ran, their lanterns swinging wildly as the shadows around them seemed to writhe and reach out. The guttural noises grew louder, echoing through the tunnels like a living thing. The shadowy tendril came again and again. One by one, the miners disappeared, pulled into the darkness by unseen hands. By the time Eli reached the lift, it was just him and one of his crewmates named John. As he frantically turned the crank to ascend, the shadows climbed the walls, closing in around them. The lift groaned as it ascended, the rusty cables creaking under the strain of the crank. Ellie turned with trembling hands. Beside him, John clung to the metal cage, his face pale, his breaths ragged. The guttural sounds from the cavern below grew louder, a chorus of something unnatural rising from the depths. "It's coming!" John shouted, his eyes wide as he glanced back into the darkness below. Eli didn't reply, his jaw clenched as he cranked harder. The lift was painfully slow, the ancient machinery struggling to pull them toward the faint pinprick of daylight far above. For a brief moment it looked like they were going to make it. They could see rays of sunlight appearing at the top of the shaft. Then it happened. A shadow surged from the tunnel, spilling into the shaft like living smoke. Tendrils of darkness lashed out, reaching for the lift, clawing at the space between the two men. "We're not gonna make it," John yelled, panic overtaking him as he gripped Eli's arm. "Do something!" Eli froze for a heartbeat, his mind racing. He saw the terror in John's eyes, felt the weight of his own exhaustion, and the cold realization hit him. The lift wouldn't hold both of them. Eli's eyes darted to the shadows below, then to the pinprick of light above. He didn't want to do it, but the survival instinct inside him roared louder than any moral hesitation. "I'm sorry," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of the approaching darkness. Before John could react, Eli shoved him, hard. John stumbled backward, his hands clawing at the air, his eyes wide with betrayal. John tried to scream, but his scream was cut short as the shadows enveloped him, dragging him down into the abyss. Eli turned away, his hands shaking as he cranked the lift faster. The guttural noises below grew louder, furious, but they didn't reach him. As the light grew closer, the sounds began to fade. When the lift finally reached the surface, Eli stumbled out into the daylight, collapsing onto the dirt. The foreman and a few other workers ran over, their faces pale with concern. "What happened?" the foreman demanded. "They're gone," Eli gasped, his chest heaving. "They're all gone." He didn't mention the shadows or the pit. He didn't mention John. But later, when he sat alone in his home, the weight of what he'd done settled on him. In the silence, he could still hear John's scream, and when he closed his eyes, he saw the look of betrayal in his friend's face. And deep in the mine, the shadows stirred, waiting for Eli to bring a next sacrifice.